In a world where innocence meets the unknown, the whispering doll unravels a tale of eerie suspense. A distracted father, a forgotten birthday, and a mysterious doll named Lilith, bought in haste, but bringing a curse that defies imagination. Watch as young Sophie's joy turns to darkness, her laughter to whispers, her life hijacked by an ancient, sinister force. From violent outbursts to chilling revelations, witness a family's struggle against a malevolent entity that seeks to consume. Can they save their daughter, or will they fall victim to the living nightmare that is Lilith? Tune in, hold tight, and prepare to enter the spine-chilling world of the Whispering Doll. Chapter 1. The Forgotten Promise. The sun was already dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows across the bustling city streets as Michael Thompson navigated his way through the evening traffic. His mind was a whirlwind of deadlines, meetings, and endless to-do lists. As a senior architect at a renowned firm, his days were consumed by his work, leaving little room for anything else. Michael's car, a well-worn sedan that had seen better days, hummed steadily beneath him, a familiar and comforting presence amidst the chaos of his life. The dashboard clock glowed 7:15 p.m., far later than he had intended to leave the office. As he remembered his promise to be home early tonight, it was his daughter Emily's 10th birthday, a milestone he had sworn not to miss. Lost in his thoughts, Michael barely noticed the darker neighborhoods he passed, each one blending into the next in the encroaching twilight. It wasn't until he caught a glimpse of his reflection in the rearview mirror, his weary eyes and furrowed brow, that a sudden realization struck him like a bolt of lightning. He had forgotten to buy Emily a birthday gift. "Damn it, Michael," he muttered under his breath, his heart sinking. How could he have forgotten something so important? He knew how much Emily looked forward to her birthday, especially this year, as she had been counting down the days with such innocent excitement. As he turned the corner, his eyes caught a flicker of color. A crudely painted sign propped up against a mailbox, illuminated by the headlights of his car. "Garage sale," it read in bold, haphazard letters. A stroke of luck, perhaps. Without a second thought, Michael pulled over, the tires crunching on the gravel driveway. The garage sale looked like it was just about to close, with boxes of odds and ends littered around a tired-looking table. A middle-aged woman sat behind it, her face illuminated by the soft glow of a lantern. Michael approached, his eyes scanning the assorted items. Old books, worn toys, miscellaneous knickknacks. Nothing seemed quite right for Emily until his gaze landed on a doll sitting quietly in the corner. It was an old-fashioned doll, with porcelain features and deep, penetrating eyes. Something about it felt unsettling, yet strangely compelling. "How much for the doll?" Michael asked, trying to mask his desperation. "For Lilith?" "Oh, just $5. She needs a good home," the woman replied, a hint of relief in her voice as she carefully handed him the doll. "Lilith," Michael echoed, feeling an inexplicable chill as he held the doll. It was beautifully crafted, yet there was something unnerving about the way its eyes seemed to follow him. With no time to spare, Michael paid for the doll and hurried back to his car, placing Lilith on the back seat. As he drove home, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Glancing in the rearview mirror, he could swear Lilith's eyes were following his every move. He attributed the eerie sensation to his exhaustion and the stress of the day. "It's just a doll," he reassured himself, focusing on the road ahead. Finally, he pulled up in front of his house, the lights inside welcoming him home. Taking a deep breath, Michael gathered the doll and stepped out of the car, ready to face his daughter and hoping that the mysterious Lilith would bring a smile, unaware of the dark history he had just brought into their home. Chapter 2. Lilith's Arrival. Inside the warm, softly lit living room of the Thompson household, 10-year-old Sophie sat curled up on the sofa, her eyes downcast. The colourful balloons and festive decorations around her seemed out of place with the sombre mood. She had been waiting eagerly for her father's return, hoping he would make it home early, as promised for her birthday celebration. Michael stepped inside, his heart heavy with guilt as he saw his daughter's disappointed face. "I'm so sorry, Sophie," he began, his voice tinged with regret. "Work was just..." Before he could finish, his wife Sarah approached him with a weary smile. "She's been waiting for you," she said softly, her expression a mix of understanding and sadness. Michael nodded, his eyes meeting Sophie's. He wanted to make it up to her, to see her smile on her special day. Reaching into the bag, he pulled out the doll he had bought at the garage sale. "Happy birthday, sweetheart. I found something special for you." Sophie's eyes widened as she saw Lilith. The disappointment vanished, replaced by a spark of joy. "Hello, Lilith," she exclaimed, with a surprising familiarity, as if she had always known the doll's name. Michael and Sarah exchanged a puzzled glance. "How did you know her name?" Michael asked, intrigued. Sophie shrugged, her attention entirely on the doll. "I just knew," she replied, her voice filled with wonder. Sarah leaned closer to Michael, her voice low. "She was really upset about you not being here, Michael, but I guess this doll makes up for it." I know. Work has been hectic, and we need the money," Michael whispered back, his eyes never leaving Sophie and Lilith. "I was lucky to get this for just $5. I couldn't afford much else." Sarah sighed, her gaze softening as she watched Sophie cradling the doll with genuine affection. "Well, she seems happy now," she conceded. The evening passed more pleasantly after that. Sophie was inseparable from Lilith, showing her new friend around the house and introducing her to her other toys. Michael and Sarah watched, relieved to see their daughter's spirits lifted. As the night drew to a close, Sophie carefully placed Lilith at the end of her bed, ensuring the doll had a perfect view of the room. "Good night, Lilith," Sophie whispered, her voice filled with a newfound happiness. Michael and Sarah retreated to their room, both relieved and a little unsettled by the intense connection Sophie had formed with the doll so quickly. They exchanged a look, a silent agreement that as long as Sophie was happy, that was all that mattered. In the quiet of the night, with the household asleep, Lilith sat at the end of Sophie's bed, her porcelain face bathed in the moonlight. Her eyes, deep and knowing, held a secret that had yet to be revealed. Chapter 3. Whispers in the Dark. The house had settled into a deep silence, the kind that only comes in the late hours of the night. Sarah Thompson, on her way to the kitchen for a glass of water, paused as she passed Sophie's bedroom. A faint murmur of voices seeped through the door, soft but distinct. Puzzled, she gently pushed the door open. The room was dimly lit by a nightlight, casting long shadows across the walls. Sophie was sitting up in bed, her back to the door, deeply engaged in conversation. "Who were you talking to, honey?" Sarah asked, her voice tinged with concern. Sophie turned, her eyes bright in the dim light. "Oh, just Lilith," she replied casually, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Sarah entered the room, a faint unease settling in her stomach. "It's late, sweetie. You should be sleeping," she said softly, tucking Sophie back under the covers. As the weeks passed, Sophie's fascination with Lilith grew into an obsession. She carried the doll everywhere, refusing to part with it for even a moment. The once lively and sociable girl began to withdraw, preferring the company of her doll over her friends and family. Sophie's behavior started to change in other ways too. She would have sudden outbursts of anger, a stark contrast to her usual cheerful demeanour. If anyone suggested she spend less time with Lilith or leave the doll behind, Sophie would erupt into tantrums, her face red with fury. Michael and Sarah grew increasingly worried. This wasn't like their daughter at all. Concerned, they decided to seek advice, hoping it was just a phase. After a lengthy conversation with a child psychologist, they were told that Sophie was likely going through significant changes associated with her age. It's not uncommon for children to form intense attachments to objects as they navigate these complex years, the psychologist explained. It's a way of coping with the challenges of growing up. Reassured, but still uneasy, Michael and Sarah tried to accept the explanation. They made efforts to engage Sophie in other activities, to bring her back to her old self, but their attempts were met with resistance and more tantrums. As days turned into weeks, the whispering at night continued, now a regular occurrence. Sophie's attachment to Lilith seemed to grow stronger, her mood swings more frequent. Michael and Sarah watched helplessly, their worry deepening, unaware of the true nature of the bond forming between their daughter and the mysterious doll named Lilith. Chapter 4. The incident in the yard. The sun shone brightly over the Thompsons' front yard, where Sophie was playing contentedly with Lilith. Her laughter filled the air, a sound that had become increasingly rare. The doll, seated beside her, seemed to be an active participant in the child's solitary game. Suddenly, a group of neighbourhood kids passed by. Among them, a girl from Sophie's school. The girl stopped and pointed at Lilith, a mocking laugh escaping her lips. "Where'd you get that creepy doll? The donation store." In an instant, Sophie's demeanour shifted drastically. The joyful child was gone, replaced by a feral creature with a look of pure rage. With startling speed, she lunged at the girl, hitting and scratching with uncharacteristic violence. It took the combined efforts of Michael and Sarah, who had rushed outside at the commotion, to pry their daughter away. Sophie's voice was shrill, filled with a venomous threat. "Will you never speak of Lilith like that again, or I'll kill you?" she screamed, her eyes burning with a disturbing intensity. Shaken by the incident, Michael and Sarah knew they had to take immediate action. They decided to take Sophie to the child psychologist, leaving Lilith behind. As they drove away, Sophie kept glancing back at the house, where Lilith was positioned on her windowsill, her porcelain face eerily watching them leave. At the psychologist's office, Sophie sat quietly, a stark contrast to the violent outburst earlier. The psychologist gently broached the topic of her attachment to Lilith. "It's important to have friends, Sophie, but it's also important to make sure that one friendship doesn't keep you from enjoying other parts of your life," she explained. "Lilith is my friend," Sophie stated firmly. "She understands me. She tells me about the world, about how people can be cruel and how you have to protect yourself." The psychologist leaned forward, intrigued. "That's a very mature perspective, Sophie. Can you tell me more about what Lilith shares with you?" Sophie began to speak, her words flowing with an unsettling sophistication. She talked about loyalty, trust, and the harsh realities of human nature, concepts far beyond her years. Her expression was earnest, her belief in Lilith's teachings unwavering. The psychologist listened intently, her professional curiosity piqued. She noted the advanced level of understanding and the intensity of Sophie's conviction. It was unusual for a child of Sophie's age to express such complex thoughts, and it raised questions about the nature of her relationship with the doll. As the session continued, the psychologist realized that unraveling the mystery of Sophie's attachment to Lilith would require a deeper exploration into the child's psyche. But for now, she focused on helping Sophie understand the importance of balancing her life and maintaining healthy relationships with people, not just with an inanimate doll. Michael and Sarah left the office with more questions than answers, their concern for their daughter growing. They couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to Lilith, something inexplicable and deeply troubling. Chapter 5. Unraveling the Mystery. Michael's mind was a whirlpool of confusion and worry as he drove back to the site of the garage sale. He needed answers, something to explain Sophie's drastic change. Since Lilith came into their lives, parking his car, he walked up to the house where he had bought the doll, his heart pounding with a mix of hope and apprehension. He knocked on the door, and after a few moments, it was answered by a woman he didn't recognize. "Hi, I'm looking for the lady who held a garage sale here a few weeks ago. I bought a doll from her," Michael explained. The woman frowned, confusion etching her face. "I'm sorry, you must have the wrong house. There's never been a garage sale here," she replied firmly before closing the door. Stunned, Michael stood there for a moment, trying to process this new twist. He was sure this was the place. With more questions than answers, he decided to do his own research. Back at home, Michael started with the name Lilith. His search led him to ancient myths, where he discovered that Lilith was often associated with dark legends. In one account, she was referred to as the daughter of Diablo, a figure shrouded in malevolence and associated with demonic lore. Digging deeper, he found another interpretation of Lilith as a malevolent entity, a being that preyed upon the innocent. His heart raced as he read about her supposed powers and the curses she was believed to bring. It was when he stumbled upon a small, obscure story about a doll named Lilith that his blood truly ran cold. The article detailed a series of unexplained incidents involving a doll that passed from owner to owner. Each owner, the story claimed, experienced a dramatic and often dangerous shift in behavior, especially among children. The doll, it was said, had the power to influence and take over its host, feeding off their energy and emotions. The description matched what was happening to Sophie almost perfectly. The doll's name, the changes in Sophie, her growing aggression and isolation. It all made a horrifying sense now. Michael sat back, his mind racing. He needed to act, to protect his daughter from whatever malevolent force resided within that doll. But how do you fight something that defies logic, something that seems to exist beyond the realm of the natural? Determined to save his daughter, Michael knew he had to find a way to sever the bond between Sophie and Lilith. The task ahead seemed daunting, but he was resolved to do whatever it took to bring his little girl back. Chapter 6. The Consequences. Unfold. Michael sat at the kitchen table, the printouts of his research spread out in front of him. Sarah joined him, her face etched with worry as he shared his findings about the doll. The room was heavy with a growing sense of dread. "We have to get rid of it, Sarah," Michael said with a resolve that belied his inner turmoil. "It's the only way to save Sophie." Sarah nodded, her maternal instincts in full agreement. They decided to wait until Sophie was asleep, then remove the doll from the house. That night, under the cover of darkness, they quietly entered Sophie's room. Lilith was there, at the end of the bed, her glassy eyes reflecting the faint moonlight. Michael carefully picked her up, ensuring not to wake Sophie, and left the house. Driving to the city's recycle dump, Michael placed the doll in the back seat, its body lying down. As he drove, a sense of unease grew within him. Glancing in the rearview mirror, he froze. The doll, which he was sure he had laid down, was now sitting upright. Shaking his head, Michael refocused on the road. But when he looked in the mirror again, His heart skipped a beat. Lilith was standing, panic rising. He dared another glance, and this time the doll was right behind him, its face unnervingly close. In that split second of terror, a truck swerved into his path. Michael's car was hit, sending it crashing into the side of the road. As the first light of morning crept into the Thompson household, Sarah, who had fallen asleep waiting for Michael's return, woke with a start. Concerned, she checked on Sophie and found her playing with Lilith as if the doll had never been removed. The phone rang, shattering the morning stillness. It was the police, informing Sarah that Michael had been in an accident. Numb with shock, she put down the phone, only to find Sophie standing right behind her, Lilith in her arms. "He shouldn't have tried to separate us," Sophie said, her voice chillingly calm. "This is what happens," she whispered to Lilith. In a fit of rage and despair, Sarah grabbed the doll from Sophie and smashed it onto the floor. "This is all the doll's fault!" she screamed, her voice echoing through the house. Sophie stared at the broken pieces of Lilith, her expression unreadable. The house was silent, save for the distant sound of approaching sirens. Sarah, overwhelmed by the unfolding tragedy, realized the terrifying extent of the doll's influence and the catastrophic consequences of trying to break its hold over her family. Final chapter: The Haunting Legacy. Months had passed since the tragic night that changed everything for the Thompson family. Sarah and Michael, each walking with the aid of crutches, bore not just the physical scars of the accident, but deep emotional wounds that seemed even more profound. They arrived at the local child psychology hospital, a place that had become a regular part of their lives. Yet the weight of each visit never lessened. Their faces, etched with a permanent look of sadness, were a stark reminder of the happiness that once filled their home. Approaching the nurse's station, Michael's voice was barely above a whisper. "Has she said anything, or moved at all?" "No," replied the nurse, her eyes reflecting a mixture of pity and concern. "I'm sorry." They entered Sophie's room, where she sat motionless, staring out towards the garden. She hadn't spoken or shown any sign of awareness since the day Lilith was destroyed. The vibrant, lively girl they once knew was gone, replaced by this silent, distant figure. The nurse, following them into the room, remarked softly, "It's almost like she's a living doll." The words struck Sarah and Michael with the force of a physical blow. Tears streamed down their faces as they sat beside their daughter, holding her hands, still hoping for a miracle that deep down they knew would never come. On the drive home, they passed through an old street, a shortcut they seldom used. Michael's eyes caught a glimpse of a young girl standing by the road. She was dressed in old-fashioned clothes, her hair tied in a style eerily reminiscent of Lilith's. As they slowed down, the girl turned towards them, her smile chillingly familiar. It was the face of Lilith, no longer confined to porcelain, but alive, real, and haunting. In that moment, a terrifying realization dawned on Sarah and Michael. Lilith, the doll with a sinister past, had somehow found a way to be reborn into their nightmare reality. Absorbing Sophie's essence, the entity that once resided in the doll was now free, walking the world in human form. As they drove away, the image of the Lilith-like girl etched itself into their minds, a symbol of the irreversible change that had befallen their family. Lilith, now free and alive, had taken from them more than just their peace. She had taken a part of their soul, leaving them to grapple with a reality far more terrifying than any ghost story. In the wake of this haunting truth, Sarah and Michael faced a future overshadowed by the loss of their daughter and the presence of an unimaginable evil, a living doll born from their worst fears. And so, we reach the end of tonight's chilling tale. But I must ask, are you still thirsting for more spine-tingling horror? If the shadows haven't whispered fear into your heart, then dare to click on the next video. But be warned, not everyone has the courage to face what lurks in the darkness. Can you? Remember, the night is long and full of terrors, and our next story is waiting to test your bravery. Until then, sleep tight, if you can.